Depending on the complexity of your site, you may want to pop in a way for users to register and log in. By default, WordPress comes with its own login and registration forms, but they're very simple and not appealing at all. That's alright, WordPress can't account for every user situation out there. Luckily, this problem is solved by using third-party plugins. There are dozens and dozens of membership plugins out there. Originally, for this lecture, I was planning on recommending one and then installing it. Then, I would walk you through on how to set it up, but there were two problems I encountered. The first problem was that the plugins were extremely bloated. Now, don't get me wrong, the plugins we're already using have some bloat, but they're not so bloated that they drastically slowed down the site because of features we're not using. However, the membership plugins that were usable had thousands of lines of code that we weren't going to use, such as payment processing, custom fields, and so much more. The second problem was finding plugins that were super simple, but they weren't exactly developer friendly. These plugins had their own UIs, and it was too much trouble to make the UI match the theme on our site. A lot of them were outdated as well. So rather than using a third-party plugin, I thought this would be a great opportunity to show you how to do it yourself. Before we get started, I want to take the time to let you know that membership plugins are extremely beneficial for any theme. If you plan on selling your theme, then including a featured packed membership plugin wouldn't be so bad. I recommend it. However, for the theme we're creating, we only need something super simple. Alright, let's get started. Some of the steps we'll be taking won't be anything we haven't done before. We'll be using a shortcode to display the form and an AJAX request to process the information. We'll be working inside the recipe plugin rather than a custom one just to save some time. Inside the main plugin file, call the add shortcode function. The name of the shortcode will be recipe auth form. The function to call is our recipe auth form shortcode. Create a file inside the includes/shortcodes directory called auth-form.php. Define the function here and include it from the main plugin file. Next, create a file named auth-form-template.php. This file will contain all the HTML for the form. Inside the Udemy theme folder, we have a template called auth.html. I'm going to open this up inside my browser. Here's what that page looks like. We're basically going to try and recreate this page. If I were to open this template inside the editor and scroll down, you'll eventually find the HTML for the form. To be specific, the HTML should be inside the section tag with the ID of content. You'll find div tags with the classes call1/3 and call2/3. Copy both these elements and their contents and paste them into the auth form template like so. After doing so, let's go back to the shortcode function. Just like before, we'll be creating a variable. I'm going to call it form.html, and its value will be the value returned by the file getContents function with the template in the first parameter and true as the second. Then I'll just return the HTML. Let's test this out now. I'm going to create a brand new page with the title My Account. The content will be the shortcode recipe auth form. The template will also need to be set to full width. Once you've made those changes, save the page and then view it. You should more or less have what I have on my screen. We can now begin authenticating the user. The very first thing we should do is make sure the form is secure for submission. There are various ways you can go about this, but WordPress provides a solution called Nonces. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link for more information about this topic. Let's take a look at what WordPress has to say about nonces. A nonce is a number used once to help protect URLs and forms from certain types of misuse, malicious or otherwise. WordPress nonces aren't numbers, but are a hash made up of numbers and letters. Nor are they used only once, but have a limited lifetime after which they expire. During that time period, the same nonce will be generated for a given user in a given context. The nonce for that action will remain the same for that user until that nonce lifecycle has completed. WordPress's security tokens are called nonces despite the above noted differences from true nonces, because they serve much the same purpose as nonces do. They help protect against several types of attacks, including CSRF, but do not protect against replay attacks because they aren't checked for one-time use. Nonces should never be relied on for authentication or authorization access control. Protect your functions using current user can. Always assume nonces can be compromised. So, as WordPress states, this helps you create a layer of security by using a token for verifying the form submission, but it's not completely foolproof. The rest of this documentation goes over how to use nonces. I suggest reading it fully after this lecture. So here's what we'll want to do. I want to load a nonce inside the template. The process will be simple. We'll just generate the nonce and then load it in the template using placeholders. Inside the template file, at the very top, I'm going to add a placeholder called nonce_field_ph. Then, inside the shortcode function, I'm going to perform a simple string replace call like we've always have. For the replacement, we'll be calling a function called wp_nonce_field. This will take care of generating a nonce value while also creating an input field containing this value. In the resource section, I provide a link to this function. There are 4 parameters which are all optional. The first one is always recommended though. The action name is a way to reference this field. You should set one as you'll need to verify it later on. You'll see how this works in just a moment. For now, I'm going to set it to recipe auth. The next parameter is name for the input field. By default, it's _wp_nonce. I'm going to set this to the default. The third parameter is whether to include a refer. A refer is the URL that the request was submitted on. It's always good practice to make sure the form was submitted on this page and not through some other site. I'm going to set this as true. The fourth parameter determines whether this field should be outputted or returned. Set this to false, which will return the field rather than output it. Let's verify that the fields are being generated and outputted by refreshing the page and checking the HTML. Using the developer tools, you'll find 2 hidden input fields appear right before our forms. Traditionally, you'll want these fields to appear inside the form, but we won't concern ourselves with that since we'll be using jQuery and Ajax to submit the form. Open the main.js file. This is the same file that contains the rating code. We'll be working inside this file for all our JavaScript needs. Once again, I'll be using the on method for listening to a form submission and preventing the default behavior. We have this div tag with an ID of register-status. I'm going to modify its HTML contents and let the user know their account is being created. Then, I'll just hide the form to prevent resubmission. Next, I'm going to create the form object like before. The action will be recipe create account. The other 5 values will just be the form's input fields. The last property I want to create will be called _wp_nonce. It's important you name it this as WordPress will be expecting this field when verifying the nonce. The value will be grabbed from the hidden input field. The ID of the input field should be _wp_nonce. The last thing I want to do is make a jQuery post request. It's the exact same way as we did it before, except I'm going to be using promises. The always method behaves similar to the previous way we did it. It'll accept a function where the response is passed into it. Just like last time, we'll check the status property and display an appropriate message to the end user. If the registration was a success, we'll just let the user know they can register. Otherwise, we'll tell them it was a failure and display the form again. Nothing new here, pretty simple stuff. Alright, so that basically sets up the front end. In the next lecture, we'll process the data and create a new user.